In this screencast, I'm going to show you how you can create a sub from scratch in VBA to do simple tasks. For example, to add the value in cell A1 to the value in cell A2, and then place that result in cell A3. A lot of people use macros to record something in VBA, and so they're not really generating code themselves, and I'm going to actually show you how you can create a sub from scratch to do simple calculations. The first thing we want to do is bring up the Visual Basic Editor. We do that by Alt F11. When we do that, it brings up the editor and we can insert a new module. I've got this option explicit already up there. It basically requires us to declare variables. In order to start a sub, we need to start with sub, and I'm going to name this add numbers. When we do that, it automatically creates the end sub. Now what we're going to want to do is bring in cell A1 and A2. We're going to just define those as new constants A and B, and then we're going to use VBA to add A plus B to create C, and then we're going to export the resultant C into cell A3. In order to start, we need to declare the variables we're working with, and we use the dim statement to do that. I'm going to dim these as singles. So I've declared my three variables that I'm going to be working with. A is going to be equal to, now there's a couple ways you can do this. Most commonly we use the range object. B is going to be equal to range A2. And then we define a new variable C, which is going to be the sum of A plus B. And then what we're trying to do is put that sum back into cell A3, and so we can sort of flip what we did before where we set A and B, and now I'm going to say range A3 is equal to C. When we do this, we should add 3 plus 7, and that will result in 10, which we'll place into cell A3. There's a couple ways to actually run the sub, and we can either use F5 to run it directly from here, or I can go up here and I can press this green arrow, play. Another way is back in Excel, I can do Alt F8 and I can select my sub there and I can run that. And then the final way is to step through this. So I can press F8. If I go back to Excel, we see that the VBA sub has put the result back into cell A3. An easier way to do this, if I go back here, would be just to do this all in one single step. I can actually eliminate all this and I can just say range A3 is equal to range A1 plus range A2. And this will actually do the same thing, and I'm going to just press F5, go back to Excel, and we see that it has calculated the sum of those two numbers. And then the final way we can do this is I can invoke the sum function from Excel. So here I'm going to go back. I'm going to declare A and B and C like I've already done, but instead of summing A and B, I'm going to actually invoke the sum function. So I go application.worksheet.function.sum of A and B. And then if I define range A3 to equal C, we are now invoking the sum function from Excel to do this addition. So I'm going to go back into Excel. I'm going to run the macro from Excel, and we see that we get the same result, which is 10. One other thing you can do, instead of setting the range to the value, I can actually display this in a message box. So if I do message box C and I press F5 to run this sub, it will actually display the result in a message box. Now let's say we wanted to ask the user for two numbers to add. And let me go back and delete these cells. I'm still going to have A and B, but instead of taking that from the spreadsheet, I'm actually going to ask the user for two numbers to add. So I'll do input box, and then you put quotations, please enter the first number. B would be same thing. We're going to ask the user using an input box, please enter the second number. And then I'll say C is going to be equal to A times B. And then I will display that to the user in a message box. So if I press F5 to run this, please enter the first number. I'll do 4. Please enter the second number, 5. So we see that 4 times 5 should be 20, and that's what's displayed in a message box. The last thing I wanted to show you in this screencast is how you can use a selection to do different things using VBA. So this would be a selection. I'm selecting those cells. Now what I want to do is set this sub up so that I can calculate the average of a selection. And it's not just cells B3 to B6, it could be any selection in general. So let's go back to the editor. I'm going to set up a new sub called selection average. I'm going to declare an array that I'm going to name A, and it's going to be a variant. And it's going to be a variant because what I'm doing is I'm picking up that entire array all at once, and those would be the current selection. So A, we're just going to set to be the selection, and then I'm actually going to display in a cell. What I'm going to do is say that the active cell offset, and I'm going to say 2 columns, so 0 rows and 2 columns over. I'm going to say that that value is going to be equal to the average, and I'm going to use application.worksheet function just to show you how we can use functions from Excel, the average of our selection. And what this should do, it should take the selection, our current selection is B3 to B6, it should compute the average, and then it's going to place that result, which is the average of these 4 numbers, it should place in an offset cell from the current active cell. The current active cell is B3. It should offset that 0 rows and 2 columns, which would just be D3. So when I run this, Alt F8, selection average, I'm going to run that, and that's in fact what it did. It computed the average of the selection. The active cell is now B3, and I offset the result 0 rows and 2 columns. So that's how we can use selection. If I wanted to use a different selection, maybe I had 100 different numbers and I wanted to compute the average, I could use the same exact code, although I might want to offset the result somewhere else.